You're listening to World Class from the Freeman Spogli Institute from International Studies at Stanford University. We bring you in-depth expertise on international affairs from Stanford's campus, straight to you. I'm Michael McFaul, your host and the director of the Freeman Spogli Institute. In the last few months, there has been multiple headlines. I would say an explosion of headlines in the news about China, rising security concerns in Indo-Pacific, lots of discussion about Taiwan. Ariana, I don't know how you keep up with it all, frankly, but you're going to help us make sense of it all, hopefully. I'm speaking today with Ariana Schuyler Mastro, a center fellow here at the Freeman Spogli Institute, who works on issues of international security, particularly in relation to the Chinese military and Asia-Pacific research issues. Ariana also serves in the United States Air Force Reserve, for which she works as a strategic planner at Indo-PACOM. Ariana, welcome back to World Class.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
So I want to walk through capabilities, intentions, and responses. That's my idea, kind of big questions. So let's start with Chinese capabilities. Obviously, it would take hours to talk about everything that's happened over the last decades, but two in particular, I think are of interest to our listeners right now. One is new capabilities that China has to invade Taiwan, to put it bluntly. And I'm wondering if you could just walk us through a little bit how those capabilities have changed over the last several years. And two, just because it's been in the news, tell us a little bit about new strategic capabilities, and in particular, this hypersonic missile that was allegedly tested and launched. Give us a sense of how you see both of these growing capabilities with the Chinese.
Well, it's good that we get to talk about these together, because I think when we talk about the conventional capabilities, I'm much more concerned than some other strategists and analysts are. And then when we talk about the strategic, I'm much less concerned than other analysts are. Perfect. So you get a well-rounded picture of how I see these issues, and they are quite different. So on the conventional side, what most people might not realize is how far the Chinese have come in the past couple of years.
Right.
When I first started working on Taiwan contingencies, I edited a book, I guess now 15 years ago, called Assessing the Threat, the Balance of Power.
15 years ago.
Yeah.
You edited your first book on Taiwan that long ago. That's remarkable to me.
Yeah, it was my first job out of college, out of Stanford. This is what made me kind of think, oh, doing research is fun and also scary. But at that time, the Chinese Taiwan invasion plan was to take a couple of fishing vessels and like paddle their way over. Right? They had very limited ability, no ability in the early 90s to fly over water, to fly at night. In weather, their ships had no defenses on it. So I remember going out to Naval War College when I was in graduate school to give a presentation about the first ship that had ship-based defenses on it. Right. And this was something very new. So for many years, the United States was, of course, we knew China was going to be willing to fight if Taiwan declared independence. Of course, we knew that fighting a war with any country that's, big and resolved is problematic. But it was never the case that the United States was going to lose that war. Right. It was always a matter of like how many days, how many days it's going to take us to win. In the intervening years, China's military has changed both quantitatively and qualitatively. Right. So now they have the largest navy in the world, for example. And those ships not only are numbers, but they are also some of the most advanced surface ships that, that can be comparable to those of the United States. In general, they're smaller than those of the United States, but then it's debatable. They're smaller, more agile. The United States are heavier, so we can have a debate about, if size matters. But for the most part, they are, good. And same with their fighters. They have the largest air force, in the region. They have 5th generation fighters. So they brought all these capabilities online. And at the same time, they started developing the capabilities to reach out and touch the United States. Right. So for the most part, when the United States fights wars, we're flying and sailing wherever we want.
Right.
In Afghanistan and Iraq, we're just like hanging out in the air. We're hanging
Nobody's going to attack us from there. Right. Yes.
No one can touch us. I remember in Intel school learning about like dogfighting, because this was just like, you have to learn about it. But it was like, who are we dogfighting with? Like, it helped me like appreciate Top Gun more or something. But there's, there's nobody up there. But China's completely different now, right? So
Right.
first they started focusing on, okay, we got to hit US assets. So, they developed the capability to hit moving ships at sea. The United States doesn't even have that capability, right? So they can hit
Wow.
aircraft carriers. And then they're like, okay, the United States relies a lot on satellites to project power. So let's make sure that we can, have anti-satellite capabilities, counter space capabilities.
Right.
And then this huge cruise and ballistic missile program that basically can take out US bases in the region in a matter of hours. So that makes it hard to operate. So we knew.
Matter of hours, you just said?
Yeah. I mean, Kadena, I think, doesn't last a day, basically, if China decides that, they are willing to hit the United States. And that's the only air base we really have in the vicinity of Taiwan. So all of this is just to say that the first thing they did, if I can greatly simplify, is from 2000 to 2010, what we call anti-access area denial. They were just like, let's punch the United States in the nose, but they couldn't actually do anything themselves, right? There's a difference between disrupting someone else's satellite. That doesn't mean you have satellites of your own.
Right.
And then 2010 to about today, again, to generalize, they started building their own power projection capability. So now they have the ships, the aircraft, they reorganize their whole military so that they can do joint operations, so that the Navy and the Air Force can do an invasion of Taiwan. And a lot of those efforts sort of came to a successful conclusion at the end of 2020. And that's why people like myself, not only because of the capabilities, but because when I was in Beijing, when I talked to the Chinese military and also government officials, they were like, we can do this now. And so maybe we should think about it. So I think, the capabilities didn't come out of nowhere. They designed those so that they would have these options. Now they have these options. And so I think it's very tempting. So that's the conventional side. So I'm very concerned. It doesn't mean that China's more powerful than the United States.
Right.
China cannot project power far beyond the region. They have no way of hitting the United States conventionally, right? Like if we bomb China, it's not like they can bomb us. They can only really project power through space, cyber, and nuclear weapons. But most of the contingencies we're talking about are really close to China. So it doesn't really matter that they can't project power. So conventional side, very concerned.
All right, that's a pretty scary, a pretty scary thing you just described. We'll get to intentions in a minute. You hinted at it, but go on the strategic side first, capabilities, and we'll pivot to intentions.
So people do a lot of mirror imaging, unsurprisingly, when it comes to China. We always think about the Cold War examples. And I have a lot of critiques to say about China and how they're behaving. But when it comes to their nuclear strategy and doctrine, China has been exceedingly reasonable about how it thinks and deals with nuclear weapons. And this is not only what they say. So China has basically had the same nuclear strategy since 1964. They have
64, going that far back. Wow.
They basically have not changed it at all. They have a no first use pledge.
Right.
And a minimum deterrent, in which basically that means they were like, Soviet Union, United States, it's really stupid. You guys are building all these nuclear weapons. We think we need to just get through a handful, enough to retaliate, to deter.
Okay.
So that's all very reasonable to me. And everything we know, their training, their doctrine, their campaign planning, all supports that this is legit. They only have one nuclear campaign. It's a counter-strike campaign. It's they train to absorb a nuclear attack and then respond. Okay. So, when it comes to the sort of strategic stability, to me, a lot of it is the problems of the United States. What's our nuclear doctrine?
Yeah.
It can get very aggressive. Depending on the president, sometimes it's we'll do it. We'll nuke whoever we want, whenever we want. Don't ask us any more questions about it, So, and then with missile defense and things like this, the Chinese become, I think, legitimately and exceedingly concerned that we might try to take out their very limited nuclear deterrent.
Right.
In the initial
because it is very limited, right? That's your point, right? So it makes them nervous it
makes them nervous. And until very recently, it was not survivable at all. So this is also a big mystery. Why didn't they try harder? But they basically put it in fixed silos. It was all solid fuel. It was all liquid fueled and not solid fueled, which means if they were going to use their nuclear weapons, because liquid is corrosive, they'd have to take them out, fuel them up. We knew where they all were. We could take them out.
Okay.
So I think, this hypersonic test, and the increase in ICBMs, I really do see it as them wanting to establish a second strike capability. that they are so concerned that the United States will preemptively take out their nuclear weapons. And they've tested this hypersonic capability that can basically deliver a nuclear warhead and evade US missile defense.
Right.
And so
To preserve mutual assured destruction, that, in other words, the second strike capability for them and the way they think about it to make sure mutual assured destruction is still a deterrent.
right, that they
Okay.
have enough ability
Enough.
to hurt the United States to deter the United States.
Got it.
And so the significance for me is less on the nuclear side, because I think having that strategic stability would be good for the relationship if
Right.
China were less concerned about their second strike. But it's more just, the United States doesn't have the ability to have a hypersonic boost vehicle like the one that the Chinese tested. So it just shows, they are more advanced in some critical emerging technologies that might shape the future of warfare beyond the nuclear sense.
Right.
Hypersonics also might give them the capability to hit the US homeland one day with conventional systems.
Conventional, right. And that's an important thing for our listeners to remember. You can arm these missiles with different kinds of warheads. So it could be conventional.
Right. And hypersonics, it just means that they can go farther, in range. It's not only that they go really fast, but like anything, like then they glide for a long time so they can go farther.
Right.
And to me, that changes the strategic calculus more than anything. So it's much more credible that China would use conventional weapons against the US homeland versus nuclear ones.
Okay, well, that's on capabilities, all scary, although the conventional sounds scarier than the strategic. That's interesting. Tell us a little bit about intentions and Taiwan, first and foremost, how you see, to the best of our knowledge, given our limitations on what we can know about how Xi Jinping is thinking about Taiwan. How has that changed in the last couple of years? And tell us, because I've read what you said about it, but tell our listeners what you think about, the near term versus medium term, long term threats of an actual invasion.
I think there are so many myths that we keep in our head about China. And one of my favorites, if I could characterize like 20 years of US strategy, it's to try to convince China they're better off being number two. And then we were like really surprised that didn't work. It's the same thing with this Taiwan debate. Everyone's like, well, like, why is Taiwan really important and why can't they wait forever? Now, a lot of my work obviously is much more empirically rigorous than this, but in my mind, I'm just like, that's not how humans work. Like, the whole goal of the Communist Party since its founding in 1949 has been to resolve this Taiwan issue. So this view of like, well, can't they just get over it? If I could come up with a way to make leaders care less about territory and power or whatever, I would be happy to do that, but I don't have a way. So Xi Jinping basically came into power and he looked at the military and he was like, you guys cannot fight a war. So this is what kind of launched some of the reforms that I referred to,
right,
that got us to the capability we have today. But then he has this whole platform of national rejuvenation in which he wants China to return to its historical and natural place as a great power and the dominant power in Asia. And he said that regaining Taiwan's a key part of that. And that's like his shtick, right? That is what, so when he first started saying stuff like this, I dismissed it because I was like, well, he'll be out in 2022. So like, no one's going to hold him accountable for this. But then he got rid of term limits and then he's going to be there forever. So then it started to take on a new light. And, I think we have to trust what Xi Jinping says, because when he tells us he's going to do something, especially when it's something we do not want to hear, they always do it. I have this whole list of like, oh, they said they were going to develop this capability, or they said they're going to control the South China Sea, or they said, made in China 2025. And then they stick to that plan. So I don't think we should dismiss that.
Interesting.
And that's why I think like this idea that, well, maybe they'll wait another 20 years. I don't know. Mike, not in conversations with you, but when I give public presentations, I always compare it to tenure. I always say that when I came to Stanford, you guys gave me 5 years to get tenure. Like, am I going to wait 5 years? Or like my second book is out. Like,
you're going to strike. Yes. Okay.
Like I'm not waiting forever,
Right.
So I understand like China doesn't want to wait forever either. It wants to resolve this issue once and for all.
Interesting. And do you think, well, let's come back to the American response right at the end. pretty much touched on the intentions on the strategic side, but just say one more piece. You talked about the capabilities. It really sounds like, in your view, they're responding to American capabilities in order to preserve mutual assured destruction.
Right. So China thinks about deterrence differently than we do. So it gets a little—
Talk about that a little bit. I want to
a
hear
little
about that.
confusing. So there's sort of two components. I mean, one that is, for China, compellence is a part of deterrence. So in the United States, we have this mindset that deterrence, you can threaten punishment to keep a country from doing something.
Right.
It's only if they deviate from the status quo that maybe they would be punished.
Right. That's the way I understand it. Right. Okay.
Right. Right. And then we have this separate category of compellence, which we're actively using force, to get the other side, usually to revert to a previous status quo.
Right.
But in our minds, deterrence is not the active use of military force.
Okay.
In the Chinese mindset, they believe that the most effective deterrent is one that involves the active application of military power.
Uh-huh.
So the way they get around it is, we read all this shelling and stuff about how to make your threats credible. And China's like, well, that's silly. How about you just use force? And then everyone knows your threat is credible. So they do this sometimes, with like the Indians and stuff, in which, like, the 1962 war, even now, some of the border skirmishes, like when they're trying to reestablish like a peacetime, stable relationship, they'll often use force to do that. And then we have this idea of like different stages of deterrence. So in their mind, they want to deter the United States, but that's US intervention to stop them from being aggressive. Right. So China wants to be able to take Taiwan, and they want to deter US intervention. But I think the way we think about deterrence is not preventing someone from stopping your aggression, but by preventing someone from being aggressive to begin with.
Yeah.
And so
in
the Chinese mindset, it is all deterrent. It is all defensive. But this is also what makes them extremely risk averse. We know from behavioral economics that countries, people are much more willing to take risks to not lose something that they think is theirs versus to get something which they don't think is theirs. And so this Chinese mindset that not only Taiwan, but the South China Sea, East China Sea, everything is already theirs, and the United States is trying to take it from them, I think is even more problematic.
Well, that is very sobering. Well, let's talk then about US responses and give us kind of your, high level take on how you think the Biden administration has responded so far, particularly about Taiwan, but I would say generally your take on their China policy. And then, let's end with what more needs to be done in your view.
So one of the problems with the current policy on Taiwan is that we do have some of these outdated concepts. And one of them is that as long as the United States demonstrates the willingness to defend Taiwan, that will establish the deterrent. But based on what I just told you about Chinese capabilities, this isn't the 1990s that the United States just threatens to get involved and China says, okay, well, if we have to fight the United States, we're going to go home. They learned a lesson from the last Taiwan Strait crisis when the United States moved an aircraft carrier battle group close to them. They didn't learn we should be better behaved.
That was back in, just to remind our listeners, 1996, right?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we think, oh, that was such a deterrent success.
Right.
But from China's mindset, they're like, well, we didn't like being deterred.
Right.
So then they developed the DF-21D to sink aircraft carriers. And now no one's sending an aircraft carrier in a crisis situation anywhere close to China. Right?
Tell us more about the DF-21D, just so we all understand what that is. That's something new and scary, right?
Yeah, I mean, you should come by my office. I have a lithograph of it on my wall I have a great friend who's a China military specialist and also an artist. It's like a great combination. But this is their missile that's capable, ballistic missile, an anti-ship ballistic missile that's capable of targeting moving ships at sea, which is actually very hard.
Right.
One, because ships are very small, the sea is very big, and also just for resolution imagery targeting wise, it's really hard to see things when they're moving, like on water or on roads. Kind of blends in.
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, so it's very difficult, and China has credibly enough demonstrated the ability to do it.
You have it.
I don't think any U.S. commander is going to send in that ship with 5,000 sailors on it anywhere close if we're in a conflict scenario.
Right.
So all of this is just to say that the Biden administration is doing all this political maneuvering to show the United States willingness to defend Taiwan. And I think that's just really provocative. It's just upsetting Beijing. Beijing thinks we're changing the political status quo, and it does nothing to enhance our deterrent because it doesn't signal anything about our capability to defend Taiwan, because the Chinese basically assume the United States will intervene. Their big question is, can they still win? And so we need to show China that they cannot win, not that, oh, they'll win, but it'll be costly or something like that. I think people don't understand the costs that Beijing is willing to absorb.
Given how important this is. So how might Biden or your future administrations for that matter, but let's talk about Biden now. How could they do that?
So it's really about capabilities in the region.
Okay.
The bottom line is China's military does not win in all scenarios. It's actually a very select few scenarios that they win, but they're only going to start the war in the scenarios that are most beneficial to them, right? If they have control over it. And the big thing is that the United States, it takes us a long time to get stuff there.
Right.
And
far away, as you said earlier, right?
We're so far away. Even with like new agreements with Australia and stuff, Australia is so far away from Taiwan. And so we need better early warning, basically intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance capabilities. And part of the Pacific Deterrence Initiative, which was a big bill of money to give the DoD, was designed to do that. Part of it is trying to put missiles in the second island chain. So basically what this is like, if you can't tell China will be costly, then I think the best strategy is one of denial, in which you can just basically fill the Taiwan Strait with missiles, and so they can't physically get over. And that's something, you don't need a lot of warning for. And that's why that's very useful.
But now, that has not happened yet, right? That's an idea. That's a capability we have that we have not deployed yet.
Well, we don't really have it. Because of the INF treaty, we weren't allowed to develop intermediate range land-based missiles. So first it's like, we got to develop them, we got to manufacture them. And then the hardest part is we have to convince countries to host them for us. And so I'll just leave it with this, the Biden administration wants to lead with diplomacy. I'm a military person, but I'm totally on board with leading with diplomacy, because diplomacy is the heart of military power in a lot of ways. But what that means is aggressively, negotiating new host arrangements, more access for the US military, and also new international institutions and treaties. We have nothing to constrain China in cyber, in outer space. They leverage power in different ways than we do. And it's not surprising to me that the institutions we built 70 years ago don't address all these things. I don't think that means we throw away international institutions. I think it means we build new ones. And I don't see those types of efforts coming out of the Biden administration. They seem to kind of want to double down, do the same things, but maybe more of them with allies and partners.
Right.
While I'm supportive of it, I just don't think it's enough.
Right. And so ironically, you want to see more diplomacy about international new agreements, maybe institutions, not coming from, as you said, from a military person. You also think that they need more diplomacy and a more aggressive strategy for dealing with these new threats.
Yeah, absolutely. And in a lot of cases, right now I'm in the process of writing a book about how China competes in the international system. So I have chapters on foreign policy, economic policy, tech, and military strategy. And my main argument is that China, contrary to conventional wisdom, is not emulating the United States.
Right.
And actually, for the most part, the way that they build power is through differentiation. And this is not particularly surprising, like to anyone in the industry or the private sector. Like, if you are a small company coming into a market dominated by a big company, you don't try to do exactly what they do with fewer resources and less experience. And so to help me come up with better recommendations for these exact questions of competition, the first step is just having a clear idea of what China's actually doing.
Yes.
So I just spent the whole morning, I guess not successfully so far, trying to figure out the correlation between how they use peacekeeping forces and places where they have commercial and economic interests. Because people always say China's going to have these bases around the world. They're not. They're trying to protect their commercial interests mainly through like training law enforcement of host nation forces, and then also sending some people through peacekeeping operations and then free riding off of other militaries. It's
Right.
like a mix of stuff, but it's just even hard to find basic data on, okay, where are they, like who, like which resolutions did they support for what reasons, and how did they send people here and not there. So the first part of the project is just to try to create some new data sets so we have a better understanding of how China is building power. And then in some areas, maybe the United States, like AI, AI enabled surveillance technology is a great example. China wants to be the internal security partner of choice. There's this huge demand. They sell these technologies to countries, actually a lot of them democracies, for public
Right.
security reasons. So it's not always for internal repression, but can be used for those reasons. The United States doesn't really want to compete with China in helping countries repress their people, right? So we're not going to outcompete with them in that area, but this is one area where we should absolutely push for some arms control or treaties,
Yes.
make it more costly for China to be selling these technologies to autocratic regimes around the world.
Right.
And so hopefully once I'm done with this book, right, and then I come to you and I say, you should give me tenure. And then I'll also go to the US government. I'll have all these recommendations. But to me, I don't think I have a clear, just building that picture, even in the military strategy, how different their approach is. A nuclear strategy, just like our systems are mostly air delivered. Most of theirs are land-based. China has zero tactical nuclear weapons. They have a whole different approach. So the mirror imaging, I think, blinds us to how they can effectively compete with us.
Right.
So the first step is really understanding what they're doing. And, that's what I'm trying to do in this book.
Well, all the power to you. We'll just keep having you back. We'll do individual sessions on individual chapters. But the point you just made about basings is a great one, underscoring your hypothesis. They're not mirror imaging us, right? They're not building bases all over the world. They have a different mechanism. And I think that's why we started with capabilities today, after all, right? You need to understand those capabilities before you think about effective counter strategies. So thrilled that you're doing that work. And we look forward to having you back. I'm guessing this topic is not going away. So we'll have you back sometime soon, okay?
Yeah, sounds great.
You've been listening to World Class from the Freeman Spogli Institute for International Studies at Stanford University. If you like what you're hearing, leave a review on Apple Podcasts and be sure to subscribe on Apple, Spotify, Simplecast, and SoundCloud to stay up to date on what's happening in the world and why.